I am Hoy, 32 years old. A normal office worker. My life is also normal like everyone else. The only difference is that I once stood on the brink of a mistake, that if I took one more step, I could lose everything. My marriage with Lynn was not bad. It was just that over time, we gradually became distant from each other. Her job became more and more demanding. The business trips were so frequent that I could not remember the last time we had a full evening together. There were nights when I stayed up late, looking at the silent scale in the room and wondering, what have I become in this marriage? And it was those gaps that made me weaker than I thought. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Tu, was a woman who was completely opposite. She was not in a hurry, not greedy, and always so calm that I was easily drawn into the feeling of being protected. When she came to my house to help with the lighting of the lamp, the scale seemed to light up just by her presence. The feeling when she asked, "Have you eaten yet?" made me feel cared for and listened to, something I had forgotten for so long in my marriage. It was raining that day. I sat with my back against the window, looking at the heavy night and wondering how life could become so miserable. Mrs. Tu brought over a pot of hot soup, saw me absent-mindedly and sat down next to me. She only said one sentence. "What's wrong, my child?" Just that made me choke up. She put her hand on my shoulder, a gentle gesture but enough to make my heart flutter. I had never told anyone, but it was at that moment that I began to see her in a different light, a light that should never have appeared. When she stood up to leave, I had been following her for a long time, and in that moment, I knew I was starting to go the wrong way. A few days later, late one night, I went down to the kitchen to drink water and saw her washing dishes. Under the yellow light, she looked strangely peaceful and gentle. I stood there longer than necessary and then asked her to come live with me so we wouldn't have to see each other again. She just smiled and refused. I asked again, my voice as if to express my feelings. "Mom, do you think I'm lonely?" She paused a bit and answered very slowly. "Loneliness is something everyone experiences at times, but you have to remember who you belong to." Then she slowly stepped back. That step seemed to draw a clear line between us, a line that I found it increasingly difficult to resist crossing. One day after coming home from work, I saw my grandmother fall asleep on the sofa because she was looking after her grandchild. The golden afternoon light fell on her gentle face, making my heart beat unreasonably fast. I picked up the newspaper she had dropped and accidentally touched her hand. She woke up looking at me with a rare, cold and alert look. "What are you doing, Hoy?" I lied awkwardly, intending to answer her cleverly. Her disappointed look that day was like a ray of sunshine into my heart, but it was still not enough to make me stop. I began to allow myself to have thoughts that I used to find disgusting, just thinking about. Things got worse as I fell into a crisis. Work was stressful. My wife only received a few messages for the sake of it, and my children kept nagging me because they missed their mother. The whole world was like that. I was in a corner, with only my mother-in-law's back to cling to. I went to her house without notice. Seeing me absent-minded, she just asked, "What's wrong?" That question seemed to open the door for me to let go of everything, in my heart including things that shouldn't exist. I said that I was lonely, that I felt she understood me better than anyone, and then in the stupidest moment of my life, I blurted out, "Mom, if only I had another child from someone who understood me like you." She stood there as if frozen. I could hear her breathing getting heavier. She stepped back, her voice low but cold. "Hoy, you're saying something unforgivable." I was still stubborn, adding a sentence that, until now, I still feel disgusted with myself. "I beg you just once." She interrupted immediately. "Just one more sentence, and I'll call him back right away and tell him everything. You're ruining your life." I stood there dumbfounded. She looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. I don't remember how I left her house. I only remember the feeling of being suffocated, both ashamed and embarrassed. For many days after that, I avoided her because I could not bear that look. I lived in a state of half awake,
half dreaming.
both terrified of myself and desperately regretful. I was afraid to see my wife, because just looking at Lynn, I felt so guilty that I wanted to fall down and beg for forgiveness, even though I knew nothing. When my mother-in-law called me to join the army, I was mentally prepared to be criticized, despised, or asked for a divorce. But she just looked at me for a long time, and very sadly. "Hoy, you have gone too far," she said, "but I understand why you fell into such a weak moment. You are not bad, you just lack something to hold on to." I hit my face, not daring to look at her. She continued, "But you have to understand. I am your wife's mother. I will never let you destroy this family. You have to go back to your place." I felt like someone was pulling me off a cliff. I apologized so many times that my voice trembled. She just sighed and said, "Go back to Lynn. Anything difficult can be fixed. Just don't let mistakes become sins." From that day on, I felt like I had just escaped from the abyss. I tried to make it up to my wife, spend time with my family, and stop fantasizing about things I was never allowed to think about. I was grateful that my mother-in-law was strong, enough to stop me from falling further. And even more grateful that that mistake did not turn into a lifelong stain. Even today, when I think back, I still shiver a little. Weakness is enough to drag a person into darkness. A little misplaced warmth can destroy a family. The limit exists to protect all of us, and luckily I was stopped at the right time, remembering a woman much stronger than me. After that conversation with my mother-in-law, I kept walking down the long road without knowing where I was going. The light from the road made me feel even more guilty. It seemed like for the first time in months, I was clearly facing myself with what I had almost done. I was scared. So scared that cold sweat ran down my spine despite the cool night air. Just one more step, just one more word, and I could lose all. My wife, my children, my mother-in-law's respect, and even myself. But life still does not stop for anyone. In the following days, my mother-in-law avoided seeing me. Not to hide, but to give me space to readjust myself. As for me, every time I heard her footsteps, coming to the house to make pearls, my heart would beat faster, not because of excitement like before, but because of shame. I tried to keep a proper distance, and so did she. Everything between us became so serious that I only said the necessary words. But it was that cold and disciplined manner that made me grow up, little by little. It was like a necessary medicine. One time, Lynn unexpectedly came home earlier than expected. She hugged me so tightly, her smile so bright. It felt like the world had just come into its proper place. I looked around, my eyes lost in exhaustion, and felt my heart suffocated. I had almost betrayed her, not in action but in thought. Just the thought alone was enough to make me feel unworthy. Lynn told me about work, about the trip, about colleagues. I nodded, listening, as if her every word was something I had lost for so long. But when she turned to hold my hand and said, "I'm sorry for neglecting you," I just wanted to kneel down and admit it all. But I couldn't. It wasn't the truth that would help her. At this time, the only thing I could do was change. In the following days, I started to spend more time with my family. I cooked more, took my children out more. I learned to share with Lynn, instead of locking myself in loneliness and looking for warmth in the wrong place. At first, things were not easy. There were days when Lynn was still busy, still came home late, still hugged her laptop to bed. But unlike before, I no longer let loneliness guide my emotions. I proactively said, "When you're done, let me see," just like that. The distance between us gradually narrowed, but the story doesn't end there. One afternoon, when my mother-in-law came over to look after the children, Lynn was preparing the dishes, and I was setting up the bookshelf. She stood at the door looking at me for a while, then calmly said, "Are you okay?" I stopped and turned to look at her. Her eyes were no longer as weary or heavy as before. They contained only the concern of an adult for someone who had fallen. I replied, "I'm better, Mom. I'm very grateful to you." She just nodded as if that was enough. But the most poignant was the time we accidentally stayed alone in the living room when Lynn went out to buy alcohol. The atmosphere was a bit awkward because, after all, there had been moments between us that were very close to the abyss. I stood up to avoid another place when she said something that I would always remember. Hoy people are not to blame for their mistakes. The party blames them when they know they are wrong, but still do not correct them. I could not say anything but nod. She looked at me, he calmed down. "I believe you, just that word alone made my chest vibrate more strongly than ever before. Trust something I thought I had done with all my heart." From that day on, I lived more slowly and carefully. I arranged my work, spent my weekends with my wife and children. I reset the limits that I had broken. And the strange thing was that when I changed, Lynn naturally changed too. She started asking me more questions, video calling me more often when she went on business trips, and every time she came home, she took the initiative to hug me for a long time. I felt like this marriage was filled with the moisture that had been lacking for a long time. One day I took the whole family on a picnic, and my mother-in-law came along. When I saw her playing with Chow, I felt my heart lighten. No more deviant thoughts. No more weakness to cling to her, only respect and gratitude. She looked at me and smiled gently, a gentle smile without any guardedness. I knew, even though she didn't say it, she had forgiven me a long time ago. During that trip, Lynn and I also talked a lot about the future, about how she would reduce her work to stay at home, more about learning more skills to move to a new, more favorable position. We really started over that evening. As the family sat down to dinner, the laughter of the soldier and his mother-in-law blended together like a song I had long forgotten how to listen to. In the village, I looked at the two women. One was the wife, the other was the mother, and I suddenly felt very lucky that I had not fallen further into sin. The scariest thing in life is not making mistakes, but believing that we cannot correct them. Fortunately, I did not believe that. Thanks to my mother-in-law's strict but loving attitude, Lynn's carelessness but sincerity, and the timely moment of enlightenment, this family is still intact. And I still have the opportunity to become a better husband, father, son-in-law. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson that life has ever taught me. When standing at the boundary, remember that there are limits, not only to prevent us from doing wrong, but also to keep all the precious things that we are not mature enough to realize. From then until that day, I almost avoided my mother-in-law because I felt so ashamed of myself. Every time I saw her face, I felt like she could read all my sinful thoughts. But the more I avoided her, the more my heart was in turmoil. There was something in the way she cared for me that made me feel uneasy and also made it difficult for me to suppress my own wrong desires. I knew I shouldn't, but my emotions wouldn't listen. One weekend morning, my wife went on a sudden business trip, and I was assigned to go with my mother-in-law to visit an acquaintance in the hospital. On the way, she spoke naturally and gently while I sat driving, my heart aching. When we reached the parking lot, she put her hand on my shoulder to thank me, with a simple sentence that made my heart pound. I imagined myself hugging her and expressing all the feelings that had been building for so long. But as soon as that thought flashed through my mind, she let go of my shoulder and walked quickly ahead, creating a distance as a gentle reminder that I had to keep my limits. When I got home, it suddenly started to rain heavily. My wife called to say that the business trip would be extended for another day. Only my mother-in-law and I were left in the large house. The sound of the rain hitting the roof tiles made the space feel strangely cool. A moment later, she brought out a cup of hot ginger tea, placed it in front of me, and I drank it with a smile. I looked at her hands, long, slender fingers, a little callous from work, but still incredibly beautiful. I boldly looked deep into her eyes, wanting to say something, wanting to break the distance between us. But she gently lowered her eyes, as if she had guessed what I was about to do, then changed the subject to my work. Just a small action, but enough to quench my impulsiveness like a splash of cold water. In the following days, I told myself I had to change, but my heart always betrayed my mind. Another time I came home earlier than planned and found my mother-in-law cleaning the potted plants in the yard, her thin coat blown askew by the wind, revealing her smooth shoulders. I stood there for a few seconds, then approached with a vague urge. I offered to help, but her gentle refusal left me frozen. She told me to go inside and rest, avoiding lifting although her voice was gentle. I felt like I had just been awakened from a shameful illusion. The more I was rejected, the more confused my heart became. Another me, when she was looking at our old wedding photos. I happened to sit close by. The close distance made me impulsive, as if all the emotions I tried to suppress suddenly flowed out. I asked her a crazy question. If I had a desire that went beyond the limit, would you blame me? She turned to look at me, her eyes calm to the point of fear, then asked back if I kept silent. Where do you think things would go? That look made me lower my head, my hands shaking that night when my wife was asleep. I couldn't sleep. I went down to the kitchen to drink some water, and coincidentally, my mother-in-law also went down to get a towel to dry on the balcony. We met in the dark, the yellow light singing on her face. I stood still, feeling my heart being squeezed. I said softly, almost whispering, "Mom, I'm sorry. I once thought I wanted you to give birth to a child. For me, just for a little while, I couldn't control myself." After saying that, I felt like a criminal waiting for judgment. She stood there for a few seconds, as if weighing each word. Then she put her hand on my shoulder. Not the affection of a woman for a man, but the seriousness and tolerance of an adult for someone who has gone astray. She said, "The relationship between husband and wife is not a game. And the relationship between mother-in-law and son-in-law is not allowed to deviate, even a step. If you make a mistake, the one who will be hurt the most will be your wife, the person you promised to protect." I stood still, unable to say anything. Each of her words was like a knife, stabbing into my selfishness. She continued, "You are not bad, but you are going in the wrong direction. Your feelings come from confusion. What you lack is not a mother, but understanding for your wife. To me, you are just someone who needs to be awakened from despair." In that moment, all my blind passion vanished. I felt small, stupid, and lost. I bowed my head for a long time, and she just stood there watching. No judgment, no anger. Just the worry of someone who had been through more than I had. The next morning, she left the house early. Before she left, she only said one sentence. "Soft but heavy as a rock. Whether you can keep the limit or not is up to you." From that day on, I became more sober. I began to care more about my wife, listen to her and work with her to mend the cracks in our marriage that I had never seen before. And that made me realize those wrong feelings were just the result of loneliness in my heart, a loneliness that I mistakenly vented on my mother-in-law. The lesson I learned is that not everything you wish for should come true. The more beautiful, closer, and more caring someone is, the more distance you have to keep. Because if you take one wrong step, you will lose everything. And my mother-in-law's rejection wasn't cold, but her way of protecting me from myself. I thought everything had stopped that night, but in fact it was just the beginning of another phase, the phase of awakening. After saying all the thoughts I had kept hidden, I avoided my mother-in-law completely. Whenever she came to visit, I would take the initiative to go out or let my wife handle the conversation. But that avoidance made me think more. I no longer felt blind desire, but instead a hidden shame and a strange gratitude. Because if she had not stopped me that day, perhaps I would have set foot in a bottomless pit from which I could not climb out. One Sunday afternoon, my mother-in-law came to the house, but my wife was not home. I stood in front of the door about to go out, when she looked at me with a calm, light gaze. She said, "You stay. We have something to talk about, so we don't have to avoid each other forever." I stood there for a while and then invited her in, feeling worried even though I knew she wouldn't blame me. She sat down on a chair, hands clasped together, smiling very gently. I know you feel awkward, but you're not a bad person. It's just that you let your emotions lead you too far. I sat opposite, not looking at her with lust. She continued, wrong. Feelings are not as shameful as not daring to correct them. The important thing is that you know how to turn back at the right time. And you did it. That's what I need to see in you. My throat tightened as I listened. She was giving me a chance to forgive myself, something I had never been able to do. She stood up, went to the shelf and took out an old family photo. In it were me, my wife, and her, all smiling brightly. She handed it to me and said softly, "The people in this photo are a family. And a family must not be broken by fleeting emotions." I stared at the photo and then looked at her for the first time, not with infatuation but with genuine respect. She continued, "I want you to do one thing, not for me but for your wife, to make her happier so that she does not have to share her husband with any other illusions even in her thoughts." That sentence woke me up a second time. I stood up and bowed my head deeply. I didn't need to say much, because I understood the whole meaning behind her words. As she was about to leave, she stopped at the door and said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. Not every woman who makes your heart flutter is the one you should walk with. There are people born for you to learn from, not for you to belong to. That sentence was like a hammer, hammered into my heart, both painful and sobering. That night when my wife came home for the first time, I saw her so tired that she just wanted to be hugged. I walked over and hugged her tightly, not because I felt a sense of lack or emptiness, but because I realized I had almost lost the most important thing. I gently stroked her back, promising myself to make up for everything. From that day on, I cared for her more, listened more, and surprisingly, we found the harmony that had been forgotten. I still see my mother-in-law occasionally, but the feeling is completely different. She is still beautiful and charming, but there is no longer any trace of false desire in me. Instead, there is respect and gratitude, because it is she and no one else who has kept the family for me. Many years have passed. Every time I see my wife holding our child, looking at our small family peacefully in the afternoon, of all out efforts, I think back to those impulsive days. I learned a lesson that I will probably never forget. In my life, there are feelings that are more dangerous. When they simmer, there are people who, the closer you are, the more distance you have to keep. And there are mistakes that if you make one mistake, you cannot go back, and sometimes rejection is the greatest gift that fate sends to save a person from his own darkness.